afternoon, everyone. My name is Pauline Massard. I'm a partner at the European office of Avisa Partners, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to this FIC Agora event to launch our latest white paper, United We Stand, Divided We Fall, putting citizens at the heart of cybersecurity efforts. Now, as many of you know, the FIC, the International Cybersecurity Forum, has become Europe's leading cybersecurity event. We're delighted that over 14,000 people attended the 2022 edition last May in Lille. The FIC is not only an annual event, it is also a media with the recent launch of INCYBER, which brings together news and op-eds on cybersecurity and digital trust. And it is also a reflection platform with the FIC Agora, which aims to generate new ideas and debate and bring together different actors of the cybersecurity ecosystem across Europe. We are delighted here today to welcome some members of the FIC's advisory board, a number of European personalities who help guide the FIC's activities and reach out to the various actors. The topic of today's white paper really is an opportunity for us to reach beyond the circle of usual suspects with whom we usually engage when we talk of cybersecurity and digital trust. I'm delighted to have a wonderful panel with us today. To my left is my colleague Amélie Rive, Director of Programs for the International Cybersecurity Forum, who will be giving a few words of introduction on the white paper. We're joined also by Isabelle Rochin, who's the Managing Director of IAPP Europe, the Association of Privacy Professionals. Alejandro Fernández Cernuda Diaz, who is Director of Engagement and Internet Integrity Program at the Global Cyber Alliance, and by Mel Meijere, who's head of the e-Governments Academy in Estonia and also the chair of the FIC's advisory board. So without much further ado, I will hand the floor to my colleague Amélie for an introduction to the white paper. Amélie, over to you.
Thank you, Pauline. Thank you, Pauline, and a huge thank you again to Pauline and Molly, who co-authored this white paper and who also organized this event. So many thanks to both of you. And as Pauline said, the idea of this white paper was really to go beyond the community that we used to address, that is cybersecurity experts or people who work in that field, and to try to get a sense of the general public's European citizens. And that is awareness to cybersecurity issues, but also how they felt about this growing landscape of cyber attacks and cyber risks. And this white paper is supported by a poll that was conducted among a global sample of a bit more than 1,000 European citizens in Germany, the UK, Poland, Italy, and France. And the results, which I won't go into any details because it's all in the white paper and I don't want to spoil you, but are very interesting and really helped us understand the dynamics in Europe at citizens level on what they felt about cybersecurity, how they view it, and how they felt they were prepared or not, and how they felt or not that they were ready to respond to cyber threat and cyber attacks. And so based on this poll, on this study, the white paper covers three different sections. The first one, we looked into how different entities, be them public or private, so the industry or government, how they protect citizens, mostly through regulations, but also all sorts of approaches that are not always known by citizens, that are not always visible, but that are parts of a government work to protect their citizens. So that's the first part. And then the second part, we looked at how citizens are empowered, that is, are given the tools and the means, but also the skills to respond to cyber threats. And so we looked at the different toolkits, programs, initiatives that are put in place by governments, the industry, but also a lot by civil society. And so that's really interesting, and that really sort of built upon the results of the polls. That's a really interesting section. And based on these two first sections, we elaborated the third one as to highlight the need for more awareness at citizens level of the solutions and the means that are available for them to protect themselves. Because what came out of this study was that although the industry is, or there are a lot of, say, solutions available for industry to protect themselves, citizens are often also often appear, to be left behind. That is, they don't know of all the tools that exist and that they can use to protect themselves. So that really is I would say, the key conclusion of this report. And based on this, also, we made 12 recommendations in 3 different sections, into 3 different categories, I would say: education and awareness raising, policy, and citizen protection, basically. So that's the three main categories, 12 recommendations that are all available in that white paper that you can find. I'm not going to say in the best bookshops, but maybe soon, one day. But anyway, you can find them in the room for those of you who are with us today. And that's, I think, my final word on this.
Thank you so much, Emily. And I'm sure the authors will be more than happy to sign the reports for you if you ask kindly at the end of the event. So, Isabelle, I'm going to turn to you now. Obviously, privacy is one of the key concerns that citizens have today online. In your current position, how do you feel about some of the results of this survey and some of the recommendations of the study? Are we more or less on the mark?
Thank you for the invitation. Maybe I'll just preface my remarks with a very short introduction of the IPP, so that gives sort of a setting for my remarks. So the IPP, the International Association of Privacy Professionals, is, as its name alludes, a privacy association. So we represent privacy professionals globally. We have about 78,000 members across 150 countries. And our main mission is to really support, promote, train, and inform the profession. We are policy neutral, which allows us to really approach our mission and the privacy profession from very diverse perspectives. People who work in organizations who are members are usually lawyers, they can be chief privacy officers, they can be data protection officers, but they're also engineers, they're also academics, they're also researchers. And I think that goes to one of the points earlier about the notion that we need to approach privacy, cybersecurity from an intersectional perspective. And I'll come back to that. So to your question about whether you're on the mark, I think, again, we share, I think the privacy community and the cybersecurity community share a lot of the problem definition, but also some of the tools that we have at hand. Security is not always about personal data. Privacy is not always about security either, but there's certainly this sort of sweet spot where we are about data protection. And so there's a lot of leveraging, I think, that can be done of both the policies, the methods, the programs, but also the skills and the people that are running behind these issues. One thing that we do look at from an IAPP perspective is the evolution of the profession, because that, I think, it gives a good pulse as well to how citizens are looking at those issues. And the profession is certainly changing, whether it's about new technology coming into play, whether it's about business models that are evolving. But that means that the problem definition is also changing. And so keeping current about technology, the rules, is a challenge for organizations. It certainly is a challenge, I would imagine, for citizens. To your point about we need to make sure that they know their rights, they know the risks, etc. So I think that's a first point. One of the vectors that we as an organization see as a quite a powerful one is, again, this notion of training and raising awareness in organizations. And that's perhaps starting with the core function of, in our case, the privacy office, but that's true also for security teams, but broadening it up to all the ancillary jobs that have to have a certain level of awareness and knowledge of what we're talking about. It's not just the job of this one chief privacy officer. It really is about bringing together a lot of the teams, again, cross-functional aspect, that are going to be part of the solution in addressing the privacy and security risks. So we for that, I think one thing that we've looked at is developing different levels of trainings that address the different needs of those capacities of those people. So we have pretty advanced training, as well as a training that is more meant to create this foundational knowledge to make sure that at least people have a basic understanding of what we're talking about, but also share a common language. And that's another point I think which is really interesting is in those discussions, is making sure that we have that we're on the same track on semantic, and then again that we are all speaking the same language. And I think another point that I'll mention, and perhaps I can leave it at that for now, is really about talent shortage that we see in the profession. And again, it has ripple effect on how we address the citizens' role in these discussions. And that's something that both the privacy and the security world unfortunately share already, which is the talent shortage of not having enough people trained, not having enough people coming to the profession to really answer the needs that we already see today and that are only going to grow in the years to come. Some of the estimates that we've done at the APP and that mirror, I think, a lot of what we see in the cyber area are that so the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, that is a little piece of regulation that people tend to know, triggered the registration of about 500,000 data protection officers in Europe only. And that's only one portion of privacy professionals that have come to the market as not necessarily as a result of the regulation, but at least have sort of been part of that movement. So 500,000 people just in that particular function. If you look at the emergence of legislations across the globe, if you look at just the state of digital transformation, and meaning more and more businesses go online, and more and more sectors, public sector increasingly goes online as well. The talent shortage that we see in the privacy area amounts to about 1.5 to 2 million privacy professionals in the next 5 to 10 years. I imagine numbers are pretty similar in the cybersecurity area as well. So that's a huge challenge, that we need to have that workforce solid, in place, robust. We need to have talent retention as well, because that's going to be part of the solution, I think, to addressing the citizens aspect of that picture. So that's a slightly gloomy note. I was hoping to finish on something more upbeat, but I'll leave it at that for now.
Odd that the outlook is generally very happy in the cybersecurity field. No, I think these are extremely interesting points. I am told that the online participants wholly agree with your point on shortage of talent. It's certainly a problem that we see across the cyber field, and I'm going to say cyber rather than cybersecurity, because I'm sure the colleagues in the room who work on cyber defense see very similar issues. It's a massive, massive issue, not just in Europe, but globally, and certainly one that we'll have to come back on. I like your point about the changing nature of the profession and the changing nature of cybersecurity as a whole, because of course that's one of the challenges we face, is that it is an ever-changing challenge with new threats, new problems, new usages. As you say, digital transformation is something that is ongoing. And we've seen, I mean, there are massive changes. I mean, I think, COVID and getting everybody working from home certainly was one factor, but there are other key factors which push this change. And I think it'll be interesting to come back to your point about a common language once we get to the Q&A. So I'm not going to take my notes because I have found your name, Alejandro. Again, I apologize if my phone will work with me. Here we go, digital transformation. Alejandro Fernández Cernuda Díaz, bienvenido. Y disculpe, so you are Director of Engagement for the Internet Integrity Program at the Global Cyber Alliance. One of the things that the white paper does is touch on a number of initiatives across both the public and the private sector. And I know that you guys at the GCA are extremely active in that. It would be interesting to hear a little bit more about this initiative and perhaps link it to some of the recommendations that the white paper puts forward.
Yeah, Alejandro Fernández Cernuda Díaz, you said it really, really, really well. Thank you. I'm sorry for having such a difficult name. The good thing is that I always find my name because it's the longest one in the lists. And it's something shared with my kids. So yeah, the Global Cyber Alliance, we are a global non-profit. So we work in the field of organizations that work without a profit, but are trying to change things in the internet. Yeah, we work, our motto is enabling a secure and trustworthy internet. And we do it by being practical. Yeah, we develop solutions. We we do something, measure it. That's also part of our messaging, yeah, as an organization. And we do it through our partners. We have a series of partners that go from the big industry to the small industry. We have startups. We have large corporations like Microsoft that are supporting us from the beginning. We also have connections with law enforcement, national research centers. So a bit of a whole of a society, yeah, approach. And we are obsessed with developing practical tools that are always free for the end users. Yeah, we operate on practical tool solutions and initiatives. Yeah, because it's a bit more complex than just giving tools. Yeah, we operate with the vulnerable communities. Through our partners, we build tools and we build resources and we put them together so that they can improve and they can be empowered. That's very connected with the result of the report. So they can be empowered by themselves and they can start the cybersecurity journey on their own with resources that are trusted and are valuable. But we also operate at the infrastructure level, and that's where my division belongs to. Yeah, we also coordinate action to address the big issues of the internet. Yes, things like IoT security, domain abuse, root insecurity. We're also exploring the massive volumes of unwanted traffic. Yeah, so everything that happens without many of the citizens knowing, but that has an impact on their cybersecurity as a whole. Yeah, so we are trying to be very active. We try to push our partners, and we try to achieve results that are always practical. And in that, with that approach, in April, it was April, yeah. One of our biggest funding members, which is the Craig Newmark Philanthropies, they started an initiative called Cyber Defense. Cyber Civil Defense. I knew I was saying something wrong. So Cyber Civil Defense, it was initially an initiative aimed at the US market, and the country as a whole, yeah. And the idea is to bring exactly what we're talking about here, yeah. Whole of society effort, bring different actors from the different aspects of the society, and to make them not only a target of solutions, but also an active player in those solutions, yeah. That goes from the standard citizens to the industry, yeah, and from the regulators to people specializing in communication and awareness, and education. So on September 15th, we had a meeting here in Brussels. We brought a selection of different actors from Europe, from the EU level to the country level, from the big industry, the small industry, well, more or less a reflection of what we do as an organization. And we got in together and we started talking about how to make it happen also in Europe, how to agree on things that could have an impact on the end user. And we agreed to many things that are reflected in the report that you have produced, yeah. Of course, you guys were part of the meeting. Your contribution was essential, was very, very important, and I'm very happy to see that we are well aligned in that sense. Yeah, especially because your report covers things and opinions and insights from actual citizens. Yeah, so that means that I think we are rowing in the right direction. Yeah, so that's it. I am very excited. I just got it yesterday. I've gone through the report very quickly, but I love the recommendations. I love the approach, this all-encompassing approach, this bringing whole of society. That's something that we also say in the cyber civil defense. And I just hope that this is not something that Agora, the FIC, or GCA takes the lead on. It has to be everybody's work. Yeah. So we have to be facilitators. We have to create the environment for these discussions to happen and these debates where there will be confronted opinions, but you have to create an environment where we all can push for it collectively, and we can agree and disagree, but in the end, something will be done, and that's the important part.
Indeed, I think that this whole of society, if not whole of government approach, certainly is something that marks cybersecurity in general. And when it comes to the security of citizens, then clearly that needs to be the point. I think I have two questions for you. The first is, actually, the three of you have now more of a global experience. Now, the FIC has traditionally been a very European event, but we just a couple of weeks ago held the first ever FIC North America in Montreal. And both Isabel and Alejandro, of course, you represent global organizations. I suppose my first question will be, do you see a fundamentally different approach in Europe and in other regions of the world in how public sector organizations, governments come to this question of citizen security? That would be my first question. And then the other is one that Apolline and I were discussing, which is, how do you make people who aren't interested? And I guess, Alejandro, I would ask you that when it comes to citizens, but Isabel, what about organizations? How do you, in inverted commas, force organization to become interested? Is it just a compliance issue? Is it just a regulatory burden? I'm just curious. So I'm just going to throw it out there. Isabel, we can start with you if you like.
Thank you. There was like 15 different questions wrapped up in one, so appreciate that. So where to start? I think on the, maybe I'll start with the latter part of your question and how do we, so it's not really our job to encourage associations to get to comply with the law. It's not our job as the IAPP. Certainly, we believe that's part of a responsible approach to data management. So, but it is very much something that we see, and I both from organizations in the private sector, in the public sector, and I would imagine very much so in the consumer space, which is a lot of it is event driven. A lot of it is knee-jerk reaction to, oh, there's been an incident, or oh, I've seen a catchy headline about my insurance company having a major data leakage. Things like that resonate with people. As unsettling as this is, it should not be about event-driven thinking, certainly not, but it plays a role into focusing the minds of people who need to pay attention, and also within organization. It's the kind of element that helps move the conversation upwards to the decision maker to make sure that the functions that need resources, need staff, need proper training, need access to all the different functions in an organization do have that ability to push forward their agenda internally. Talking about event-driven, the COVID pandemic was certainly something that was obviously an important driver recently, and we've seen some numbers on that the IAPP has co-authored with other groups, which was that as a result of COVID, 54% of consumers felt that they were more privacy aware as a result of pandemic and all the discussions that we had in that landscape of remote working, of health related issues and how we manage sensitive data, all of that. So there's been certainly an influx in the awareness. Now I want to draw a distinction there, which I think is pretty important, between the understanding of the risk, what we're talking about, and the acceptance of risk. Understanding something does not mean that there's going to be a harmonious acceptance of the consequences, right? And that's something that is, I think, important to bear in mind, which is the expectations. In the privacy world, it's not just about privacy and how my personal data is protected. Sometimes it's about how I manage my privacy and free access to a service. It's about I want to access something right away, and I may have to consent without clicking on the privacy policy. So there's often a balance, or at least an arbitration that the person will do on how to approach these issues. And those are really cultural and societal expectations that can vary a lot. To your point about whether we're talking about global or more regional, we may not see the same response to those questions in Belgium, where we are in this room, as opposed to some of the audience online sitting in different countries. The sort of expectations and the way we perceive certain issues may vary, whether we're depending on where we are, but also depending on our own profile, whether we're a child or whether we're an older person. Like all of those categories bear weight into how we look at those issues and the level of understanding, the level of awareness, and what tools will be most effective to then trigger the attention of those people. So we're talking, I think, about a very granular need for some of those solutions. And I think I don't think that we can have a very static solution to something that is inherently fluid. So I'll leave it at that. And
so a simple way forward then is what you're saying.
You had 15 questions for me, so
fair enough, fair enough. Welcome, Mel. We're going to keep going with this first round of question before we come to you, so that you have 5 minutes to arrive, if that's okay with you. I'm just going to, and then we'll come to you. Go ahead, Alejandro.
Okay, so I'm very happy that you spoke first, and not only because of shyness, but also because I think privacy walk the way first, and they are showing a lot of lessons for cybersecurity. Yeah, GDPR was a massive event in the internet for not only for Europe, but across the globe, and it is having a massive impact. It's bringing privacy to. We all hate cookies and all that, yeah. But every time you go into a new website, you remember about privacy, and you know that privacy is being enforced. You know that privacy is being executed, but people, organizations, large banks, are getting tickets and they have to pay. Or Google, for instance, yesterday, not in Europe, but in the US, yeah, they got a massive sanction, yeah, for damaging the privacy. So it shows that things can happen, and that companies, corporations, and even governments can be made responsible for it. So it's everybody's business, and that's an ideal path forward for cybersecurity. Yeah. That also relates to the question about the contextualization. Of course, we are a global organization, but same as cyber civil defense started as a US concept, now it's transitioning to a global concept. And the first stop is, we've also presented in Singapore, but the first proper stop where we had a proper debate was Europe. And the approach is completely different. The name of the initiative doesn't resonate the same here as in the US, yeah? So those nuances that if you want to be global, you have to be local. That's a must, and you have to take it into account. And you have to understand that from the European perspective, you are dealing with a smaller industry, you're dealing with a bunch of citizens that are really, really, really committed to their privacy. For them, it's a very important thing. And that are even in some forums, they're even asking to monetize that privacy, yeah, to take a bit of the share, yeah. So I think the whole thing applies to cybersecurity. Yeah, it would be, well, we have NIS2, and all the regulations that are being passed. They're gonna have a massive impact as the GDPR had. Yeah, and that's gonna empower citizens, and they're gonna take the lead. And there is lots of free resources, and they will have. We have to. Awareness has also go into the direction of showing that hey, you can use that, and you have to use that. And you have to use that to be part of the same as the. You have to be part of the profits that are being generated. Yeah, connecting to what I was saying about privacy. People should be able to know that they can create online businesses securely, that they won't lose their money, that they can trust operations, they can sell their stuff, they can move to that digital platform in a safe way, because there is proper regulation, because crimes are being prosecuted, because I don't know what level of annoyance we will get, same as the cookies, but there is visible, there's a visualization of cybersecurity. Trust is being built, yeah? So I think the path forward, same as GDPR and the privacy regulations have empowered citizens, I think we have to do the same for cybersecurity, and we have to walk the way, inspiring. There's lots of inspiration in the privacy world, but also through our own mechanisms. And one important aspect, and I will just close it here, is the development of a proper European cybersecurity industry, and that's where organizations and forums like FIC are doing a great job. Yeah, the industry is small, but it's very well connected, and it has a closer connection to governments. So we have to take advantage of that.
Yes, I think I'd argue that the industry is certainly growing, and we have with us here Clément Rossi, who's Director of Partnerships for the FIC, and I'm sure he would agree that it certainly is growing. We're running out of space where to put them. Just coming to you, Emily, very quickly before we come back to Mel, and I think I will, part of what I will ask Mel will be about what is the buck stop between the EU and the member states. I mean, this is certainly somewhere well. But first of all, to you, Emily, so you just came back from Montreal. What great big differences do you see between North America and Europe, and how these issues are tackled?
So I think the thing that really impressed me in Montreal was, but it was just not just during the event, but also before, where we were organizing it, is how much they focus on education and training from a very young age. Like on the 2 days, the event was on 2 days, and half of one day was dedicated to talents in cybersecurity. Now, it's always a topic that we do address at FIC. We've been doing this for years and years and years, but never half a day over 2 days. And it's really something that it really focused on. And we had so many students coming or asking to come, and it was something that I'd never seen in Europe before, how this focus, and you can see that really there are efforts being made to raise awareness among the younger generation, not only teenager, but also kids from a very young age. So yeah, that's really interesting. And the second point I would say was maybe something that we can tech example in Europe is, I think Quebec is the first state to have a cybersecurity minister. And yeah, who visited the event. And I mean, it's something that, you know, we'll have ministers dedicated to digital or, you know, sciences or technologies, but cybersecurity is something that, you know, we don't have over here yet. So maybe that's something to take from them.
Thank you very much, Emily. Mel, glad that you could join us. Lovely to see you. We obviously had a quick chat about the key conclusions of this paper last week. I'd really be grateful if you could share some of your thoughts with the room in the online room, I should say, before we then open up to a Q&A. And again, the idea really is to hear your ideas and not just your questions. Really, one of the things I'd love to hear from you is, how far should it lie with governments and European institutions? How far should it lie with the private sector? How far should it lie with civil society to make sure that citizens not only feel, but in fact are safer online today?
Yeah, good questions, and apologies for being late, and really, really fascinating discussion. This title or the topic or the focus of this paper really very much resonates, I think, because indeed, there have been discussions on technology and the threats and challenges of cybersecurity for over a decade, but it's more and more important to put the human into the middle of it and to talk about it in a humanly understandable way and to make it relevant for each and every individual of ours. So what resonated strongly for me within this paper, likewise, first of all, is the focus that you put on education. I think it's very, very important, and it takes different dimensions. As you mentioned, the early age education that I think we are largely missing, and what I found is great here also that you capture, or that you've done some research about the best practices, because this, I think, is a true value of like practical nudges of how this or that country approaches it. What are the useful games? What are the useful courses and research and this sort of network that others could reciprocate. And then within education, there's also this student talent level, which I think Europe is doing pretty well. Here, there's a series of student Olympics. I think that's been initiated by INCYBER. And as I travel around in Europe, back home in Estonia, as well as in Western Balkans, where my work has taken me lately, this is really very much inspiring people, young students who want to learn more about hacking and compete. This is a really way to promote the area as well as to identify talent. So that's one area which I think you've done a great job, and I very much agree. The other welcome point, I think, here is attention that you draw to the EU Resilience Act. And I think there's not much information out there. There could be, like, I think this could be an area to develop more, to kind of like share this understanding which lies somewhere within the Parliament and the Commission with the wider public of what it is exactly, what are the relevance for the people, for the industry, for the governments. So yes, very, very much like that about this paper. In addition to, or complementary to what you've underlined here, and in responding your question, where lies this division of labor between EU and member states, I would say that having done a little bit of this kind of work of like gathering best practices within EU member states about how to raise cybersecurity awareness among the general public, it is, I think, useful that EU, be it various sort of like FIC-like initiatives, or INCYBER, or anywhere, or the Commission as such, provides this sort of either background studies, regulations, as they do in form of NIST Directive, Resilience Act, Cybersecurity Act, but also this network of databases or information about of capturing best practices. But ultimately, I think it's the road to travel by the member states themselves. And when we studied what are the sort of like key areas that are can be successful in organizing campaigns, from the member state and from the state perspective, there were ultimately 4 points that came out. First, it appeared that it's useful to have a clear vision for cybersecurity awareness raising as a general ideal or goal for to move towards, and to have that clearly mentioned in a national cybersecurity strategy. Together with having a clear owner of the topic, someone who leads it. It cannot be, of course, one agency, public sector agency. It has to be an interagency cooperation in very closely with the your cybersecurity agency, with the police, because a lot of this is linked with child abuse online and other criminality elements, as well as the private sector, telcos, internet service providers, and so on. But someone has to lead it, and it's useful to have a clear owner. So that's one. Second, of course, it's useful to have a clear budget for it, and this is not given. Although this is starting to happen, to have a multi-year regular budget line to organize public awareness campaigns, because it's been rather like a project-based approach, and that gives some success, but not long-term confidentiality or sustainability. Thirdly, I'd add to this like a smaller nudge at what we found useful was where some member states work with media, because the journalists are really the amplifiers of explaining to the people how to be more practical and safe online. So working with journalists as a key group is useful. And last point that I'd like to underline is the importance of working together with the statistics board, basically in identifying your target groups. It's useful to do public polls about people's behavior online, and I noticed with pleasure that you initiated some of this here as well. I think DESI, the EU large annual statistics study, was a digital index, is useful, but I think like what we found when we studied is like when member states closely work with national statistics offices, so that national campaigns could be more clearly targeted, because before you start speaking or doing something, you would have to know whom are you doing it, and thereby, by defining well your target group, you then also pick the right tools. If it's the retired people, it could be libraries where they gather. If it's younger people, it could be Instagram games or campaigns. So if it's minority groups, you do it in their language. So it's the key is to get to the groups. Yes, to study more people's behavior online, to understand what makes people move and how to better design these campaigns. Thanks.
Absolutely. Isabel, I think you wanted to react. Please go ahead.
If you don't mind, I wanted to react and link actually two things that you mentioned, which was in this concept, the role of the regulators as well as in the privacy world. Data protection authorities in Europe have been extremely present and extremely active in making sure that the GDPR is not just a piece of paper, but has sort of an active enforcement and an active compliance-driven approach. And I think in the picture that you describe, I think there's a couple of things that would be interesting maybe to reflect on. I mentioned earlier the COVID trigger in terms of the consumer awareness, 54% of people being just slightly more privacy aware. If we, I want you to give the specifics to that because it's quite relevant, is that the three buckets of issues that people have put on their radar as a result was security, sort of the collection and storage of personal data, is the control, what type of data is shared and to do what, and it's the trust, which you mentioned in the introduction as well. And so linking that back to the role of the regulators, I think is quite key. It's arguably, it's when your organization is never a good sign to have a regulator come knock on your door. Usually it's not with good news, right? However, that being said, what we see in the privacy world is that the European Data Protection Board, so the board at EU level that is the umbrella organization for the national supervisory authorities, is actually playing increasingly a role into this empowerment of the core function that actually do the work. And so that's something that I think it can be maybe exported, or at least can be a food for thought in the cyber world as well, where regulators can be can be helpful in accelerating, thank you, some of that awareness, and again, empowerment of staff and resources of those functions. So I just want to offer that as well from the privacy world.
Thank you very much. So I'm going to open it up to the room. We have already quite a few questions online, but I would love to get, as I say, reactions, ideas, suggestions, criticism, why not, in the room. I already have, yes, please. And if you could kindly introduce yourselves, that would be lovely.
So there has to be a first guy who has the question. So I'm going on. Apologize for my Franglish. There is one point.
Sorry, can you just quickly introduce yourself?
I'm general manager in the agency, which is a cybersecurity offensive security agency. We are mainly in France and Spain. So yeah, I'm just doing my question is regarding regulation, regarding bug bounty hunting stuff, which is mainly our job. That's why I'm asking the question. But we've been struggling with compliance and regulation regarding our activity in front of not big companies who already know and are aware regarding bug bounty programs, but more in front of, let's say, small company, PMEs, okay? Because or they don't know or they don't have the resources to access to bug bounty programs. So what we decided to do is to pen test them, sometimes saying them we are pen testing them, and sometimes not saying them, but just showing them that there are some permissive stuff in their network and so on. It has been 5 years ago. We have been a lot of complaints. We have changed our way to do things, but
that's aggressive marketing. Well done.
Yeah, it's yeah, yeah, with aggressive response as well. But however, we changed our way of doing things. But what we noticed is that small companies don't have these resources, awareness, training, or even maturity regarding cybersecurity. And the thing is that as consumers, we all use applications that have been made by big companies, but also by subcontractors of these big companies, which are small companies, and they don't have any awareness regarding that stuff. How can you, let's say, propose some stuff regarding regulation as label or something like that? How do you see the future of regulation regarding bug bounty hunting for small companies in order for the consumer to be aware that the application they are using is, let's say, safe or something like that? I don't know if you see my point.
Yeah, no, and I think there's something about that in the white paper, indeed, with a kind of a like food labeling. You know, how healthy is it? Something like that for cybersecurity. But I think there are actually, if I may, that there are several questions to take away from your question, several of which actually have been reflected in the chat from our online participants. I think the fundamental one is, how the hell do we fund all of this? I mean, let's face it, we've come out of 2 years which have cost our states a lot of money. Public budgets are not at the top of their shape. And the question is cybersecurity and our funding programs for cybersecurity going to fall victim to the current economic situation? How can we get creative, perhaps, about funding cybersecurity? And that's a huge subject, because we are indeed talking about bug bounty programs, hacking competitions. I mean, it really resonated with me when you mentioned it. Of course, the FIC has the European Cyber Cup. INCYBER organizes a hacking competition. There are loads everywhere. How do we fund education? How do we fund companies? How do we fund awareness campaigns? So I'd be really interested to hear a little bit from the panel about, have you been in charge of some creative funding practices? It's not an easy question, but at some point, this is all going to cost money.
Yeah, and just to add, we have a conventional way of addressing the matter of cybersecurity. And the thing is that I think unconventional way may help as well in the fact of safety and awareness to people as well. Bug bounty is unconventional. And
it was unconventional.
For small entities, it is still unconventional.
No, but certainly the idea is to get creative in terms of funding, because we're not going to have much choice. So perhaps starting with you, Mel.
Yeah, well, I can say, speaking from Estonia's experience, it's actually been a different development trend, because ever since the war in Ukraine started, the security awareness, well, I mean, our part of the world has always been highly aware of the threats, but it has hit the government that there is also a war in cyberspace going within the Estonian cyberspace. So since February, actually, financing has approved state financing for cybersecurity. Our state information system has launched a formal bug bounty program whereby they have agreement with companies that if in public network bugs are found, there will be money. So yeah, bounty. So I've seen the contrary, and I would conclude from there that it's all a matter of priorities and political priorities. And if the government prioritizes this sphere, you will find money. And I'm seeing even actually more and more governments that are shaken up by high-end attacks and that realize that they cannot afford to ignore, but would have to dedicate both human talent, governance resources, as well as budget to the cybersecurity, because it can happen that an attack can actually freeze a whole sector or a country. What we've seen in Europe since July in places like Albania, Montenegro, for example, in a number of Western Balkan countries, it's a matter of setting priorities.
Absolutely. I think it's what Isabel was saying earlier. Incidents resonate at the end of the day, and they are usually the alarm bell that governments need. I mean, certainly at EU level, we've seen a lot of investment in cybersecurity in all its shapes and forms. The question is how much of that trickles down to the citizen level. Alejandro, if you want to come in.
Well, I think we have to operate at several levels, and it has to happen at once. Yeah, it's a question of coordination. Yeah. And bug bounty thing, there are ways there are tools that can help the medium and small size enterprises protect themselves, yeah, and get everything updated and especially be aware of the risk, yeah. But there are also tools that can work at the infrastructure level. This is why in our organization we operate at two levels, yeah. We can make things easier. We can be more effective in the detection of vulnerabilities and in making everybody aware that those things are happening and that some coordination at the infrastructure level can have an impact downwards. Yeah, that's one of the things. When it comes to financing, I think we also have to consider it in a multiple level. Yeah, I think the key point is now this is a very local approach. Yeah, because we are in Europe, we are used to having the state supporting initiatives. Yeah, that go to a political agenda. So it has to be in the political agenda. So that it gets budgeted and it has to get the initial push from public authorities. That's at the European level, because in other realities it doesn't happen like that. But it also has to be a market that creates incentives on its own. And this idea of trust and having empowered citizens that can have access to the labor market with cybersecurity, not only from a technical point of view, but from an awareness point of view, from a policy point of view, from communication point of view, it's a huge market. We have to develop that market and we have to work together to develop that market so that at some point there is a bit of self-sustainability too, yeah, and a lot of opportunities. And it has to be we have to go for a multiple approach where if it's a whole of society, everybody's business, everybody will be part of it, and the priorities are set, then there should be a point where you don't need to use imagination to get funding because it's going to be a need. And it has to be, if you want to keep the society working as it's working, you have to keep on feeding the engine. And by feeding it, you will get profits because you will generate added value in an industry. Yeah, that's this question about added value and the importance of awareness for creating added value is also an important one, because awareness is good to let the people know about the risks, but also to create better services. If people are aware, if education is high, if your medium or small size enterprises are aware of the issue, then they may access to higher services. I guess that was the objective of your marketing campaign, yeah?
So it's ultimately about making, in fact, talking about consumers rather than citizens and making them more demanding.
Yeah, more demanding and multiplying the opportunities. It's a question of incentives, yeah? In Europe, we are used to having the governments, the European Union
use the stick
pushing,
rather than the carrot.
Yeah, they start the engine, but if it wants to keep on, well, again, privacy You were mentioning 500 people, 500,000 people have 500,000 DPOs in Europe. Only that's a lot of people. And together with that, you have all the services that are being created and all that. It's something that 10 years ago, when was it? Was 2017, no? 2018? 2016, yeah, sorry about that. 10 years ago, we didn't have. And there is a new market around that. And that market, it's also setting the standards, not only in Europe, but also in other realities, yeah?
So it's a kind of a virtuous circle with security feeding prosperity and ongoing, I suppose, in a way.
It has to be like that. Otherwise, it will be seen as a permanent expense. Yeah, that's the problem. That's the big dilemma of security. Security is always considered like a cost, not as an opportunity. And in this case, the connection with cybersecurity and digitalization and using the internet as a tool for prosperity, we have to break that equation. It's essential.
Absolutely. Would you like to react, and then I'll come back to the room for. I see already 2 questions. Yeah. Go on.
Though I don't have anything groundbreaking to add, I concur with what's been said before. I think in terms of what we see triggering a bit more of a response is regulation, is the enforcement authority, reactiveness and proactiveness. It's the reputational damage that can be done whenever there's an incident that helps, quote unquote. And I think that it's a combination of all of that. What I would add though is I think privacy is still in some of its areas still in its infancy, or at least there's more of journey coming up in terms of really truly integrating concepts like privacy by design or security by design that are really more structural solutions as well to some of the discussions there. So again, I don't know that there's an arriving goal to that. It's very much a journey, but those are things as well that simply take time. But having increasingly in organizations product development people or consumer-facing functions in organization that say, hey, I'm getting calls from my customers or my suppliers, they care about that stuff. So all of that combined just helps creating that virtuous cycle in organizations as well.
Absolutely. And it'll really be interesting to see how the market indeed reacts. I mean, at the end of the day, the EU is a market, and it'll be interesting to see how it sort of self-regulates. And I think it could be interesting ultimately to look at lessons learned from other sectors, perhaps at some point. Pauline, perhaps an idea for a future white paper. I see 2 questions in the front, the gentleman and then the lady in the... If they can get a mic. Thank you. And if you could introduce yourself. Thank you.
Of course, thank you very much. So my name is Dieter Stroomans. I'm a Director of Business Intelligence at my own company, Mons Consulting. I just have 3 short questions. I'm going to keep this short. First of all, you were talking about talent retention, and we've kind of grazed the topic, but I think it's always very interesting, especially for defense, because we also mentioned it's relevant for the defense sector. You were mentioning this education and talent discovery also in your discussion. Do you think it's one of the ways that we could effectively tackle the high demands that go with talent retention, especially in the defense sector? Usually you have to pay them a lot of incentives have to be given, and for them not to leave after 4 or 5 years. So do you think that enlarging the pool to reduce the pressure on those positions is a valid response to this problematic? Then second of all, also because I'm mostly involved in open source intelligence and counterintelligence, the first part of this question is, why do we always have to wait for these events? You mentioned also a lot of these things are event-based. Why do we need a hackathon for things to develop, for things to go further? And because it's also about putting citizens at the heart of cybersecurity efforts, why is there less attention given to already ongoing cybersecurity, citizen-led, let's say, movements? I mean, just go on Discord and you can find any answers. Before coming in here, I needed 2 patches identified of a PMC in Ukraine. Within 5 minutes, I had the answer. Why don't we have the same thing for cyber? And then third of all, to go back to also one of the initial questions of what is it going to take for us to be shaken awake or shook awake for this? As the young gentleman mentioned, it's good when it's the nice guys doing this. But the problem is most companies that are affected by cybersecurity issues are those smaller and medium-sized companies. Because the big ones can afford it, and also are harder targets, so obviously goes to get the money in order. Anyways, that's another discussion. But what do you think it's going to take? I mean, we're in Belgium, and a few months ago, not even a year ago, we were saying we were attacked by 29 countries, which was obviously a botnet attack, which no one was referring anything to. I mean, it was quite the headline. And, despite efforts by the CCB and the cyber command that is now really starting up, what is it going to take? So first of all, the talent pool enlargement. Second of all, the civil society involvement through ongoing projects and something which goes beyond the event or community-based approach. And third of all, what is it going to take? Thank you very much.
Okay, well, I think that the European Commission would argue that it has a couple of responses to your questions. I'm going to take the second question, well, like the fifth, sixth question in a row, just because I'm a bit concerned of time and I'm sure other people will have questions. Please.
Thank you. Julia Schütze, I work at a cybersecurity policy think tank in Berlin.
And you're also on the FIC
so
advisory
actually,
board.
I can tag on one of his questions at least. What I really like about the approach that you're thinking about right now is including, for example, in national strategies, this idea of cyber civil defense. I think in Germany, we would probably try to talk about resilience instead, because defense is a touchy topic, but I don't want to get into the definitions of this. I think we need to think about then a different structure of involving citizens, because right now we have mainly them, telling them, okay, you have to care about phishing, you have to care about multi-factor, like, personal things. But what he already alluded to is like, yeah, but I mean, we have a lot of talent. Maybe they're not necessarily involved right now, volunteering at an NGO. We have some in Germany, but even them, they're working like side by side and not together with the government. So I think there needs to be new structures of involving, for example, volunteers in cases where shit really hits the fan and we need like people, because the government doesn't have as many incident responders, for example. But also, how do we involve, for example, people in more strategic ways, for example, when it comes to large scale like phishing incidences in a country? I know that Belgium is trying to reach citizens, and then they will report, for example, phishing, then they can block that or tell companies to block that. But that's still quite like innovative approaches that, you need to have a lot of trust in the government. You need to understand how they're working, what is actually expected from you. So I wonder, what the panel thinks about, first of all, like new structures that go beyond public-private partnerships, and also public-private civil partnerships, civil as in organized NGOs. I think I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. So I guess perhaps we should be considering a kind of a European Cyber Peace Corps, something along those lines. Mel, I'm going to start with you. There are quite a few questions to answer. I'm not sure you'll be able to answer all of them, but I will give you the floor. We still have 24 minutes. We should be good to answer everything.
Thank you. I won't try to explain the whole world. I wanted to follow up on what you said. This relationship between the private sector, the drive that the market creates, and that the pressure that the regulations create, and I really like to underline that. From one end, it's useful, of course, if we as people become more demanding regarding services provided to us and the quality of gadgets, so that they be secure. However, I would. And that is fair, but I wouldn't want to put all the pressure on a person, but rather underline the responsibility of the provider and the need to provide secure services and secure gadgets to begin with. Not that we would, updating is normal these days, I guess, as was wearing masks a year ago. But still, there is this responsibility to involve in security by design, and also hopefully a pressure, at least as the social corporate social responsibility to involve in providing trainings, courses, know-how, awareness. So this sort of, I wouldn't take the pressure away from the industry to actually be forward-leaning in and having some responsibility in carrying part of the load in cybersecurity. Civil society involvement, yeah, I mean, I can just resonate, like there of course are already lots of great initiatives out there, Citizens Lab, for example, from Canada, and thereby it's upon us as aware or conscious consumers to find the right information, the reports, the interesting reports that are also, again, written in a humanly readable form. I applaud Microsoft that's been doing very well in putting out reports about very important topics. I'm thinking of the war in Ukraine and explaining what that means for the cyber. I refer to, for example, the cyber attacks in Albania. There is very little public information out there, but they've done a good job. But it's, again, the question of how do you resonate, or how do you amplify these reports so that we get to read them? And here again, I underline the importance of working with media, politicos, cybersecurity, for example, correspondence in cybersecurity, regular feeds come to mind, and they're doing a great job. I wish there's more like that. Thanks.
Where to start from? There were so many questions. Yeah, you mentioned Microsoft. That's a very good example of how things work. They are talking about cybersecurity in a very natural way, and about security in a very natural way. They have integrated it into their products and solutions. They do it. They speak openly about it, and they are great contributors to the whole cybersecurity ecosystem in the world globally. Yeah, in terms of education, in terms of security actions, and that's the kind of things we would like to have. Yeah, it has to be everybody's business. It doesn't. If we want to have creative approaches, we have to also have those who should be playing a role play a role. Yeah, so we have to be able to enforce and to make the governments more responsible, make the organizations more responsible, make the citizens more aware and also but more responsible. It's their responsibility after all. Also, yeah. So it's not something that we have to patronize or to be like very no. Same as with your children, you have to educate them, which means you have to show them the wrong things, but they also have to learn by themselves. Yeah. So that's also, if you want to foster that, you have to bring the debate to many forums so that creativity happens by itself. I think the same applies with the talent. Yeah. If you create market opportunities, and if people that work in the defense, or if they have a solid market where they can refer to or they can contribute to, that should happen naturally. I think that's a question of time. Yeah, the war in Ukraine is changing things. Yeah, in countries like Estonia, you feel it closer because you're closer, but it's going to change. It's going to have a large impact in the way we understand things and the way we prioritize things. And I think there's going to be market. I believe in market, in the idea that it creates dynamics, that it creates incentives and it creates opportunities. Yeah, but you have to be very annoying. You have to be obnoxious, bringing the topic all the time, like the cookie thing. It has to be present. No, but it's true that it has to be visible. Yeah, not only in a threatening way. Yeah, you're going to lose your money, you're going to lose your family pictures, but no, this is relevant for you, and you have to take responsibility in it. Yeah. What else were you saying? You were asking about the.
Yeah. Sorry. So I think you also kind of answered this.
I think it's time. What's going to take? It's going to take time. It's going to take.
It's 12 already for this. So that's the reason why I'm also asking. I mean, yeah, I can say a lot of things about this room already, just in terms of cybersecurity.
Yeah, it's going to take time and it's going to take money. There is a big gap between the money that is invested in Europe versus Israel and the US. They are in the report also. Yeah, we have a 550. I don't know, a huge market. And we have to invest money in a proportional way. It's a question of, I don't know where that money will come from, but it has to be invested if we want to develop the market.
Yes, I suppose the question is where will it come from? Isabelle, Amélie, I'd really like to focus in the remaining time that we have on and these are really the majority of the questions on the chat. Is number one, the talent question. How do we attract talent and how do we retain talent? And I wonder from both of you, first of all, perhaps from you, Isabelle, what have you guys done? What have your members been doing? What has worked well and what hasn't? And then I'll come to you, perhaps, Amélie. In your outreach to all these various actors of the ecosystem that you've done through years of working on the FIC, what are the key motivations that you're seeing? Is it just about the money? Is it about, as Julia mentioned, perhaps working for the greater good? How do we get the good guys to work for the greater good? Is there a chasm between people working in NGOs and those working in government? Is it possible to bring them together? How do we sort of harmonize all of that and bring it forward? But perhaps starting with you, Isabelle.
Yeah, what talent and retention is a big focus area for the APP. Our mission is to promote and support the profession, so we need a profession to promote and support, but most importantly, we need a profession and we need professionals to do the work. And I think when we see regulation and laws and rules being enacted, we need to make sure that we have enough people and skilled people to do the work. Otherwise, there's a delta here that's not serving anybody. When we talk about talent shortage and talent retention, I think we're also looking at the variety of profiles that the profession needs. That's very true in the privacy world. That's very true in the security world. And I'm speaking as if it's two different worlds. It's not what I mean. It's certainly, they're very much intertwined. Originally, I think our profession was perhaps largely lawyers or public policy people, and we do see a need, and the APP is doing a lot of work in that respect to really encourage other profiles to get into the privacy area. We need engineers, we need students in business schools, we need a lot of different profiles, because that really speaks to the holistic approach that those kind of compliance programs really require to be efficient. So in terms of what the APP has done, so we've been around for about 20 years as an association. So we've trained a lot of people in the realms of dozens, if not hundreds of thousands globally. And believe it or not, that's still not enough to fill the gap that we need, as I mentioned earlier. So that's sort of an ongoing thing that the profession needs. And again, it does square nicely with some of the cybersecurity skill sets that need to fit into that program as well. We also need to attract a bit more students to come into the profession to make sure that we feed that sort of work stream. So we are doing a lot of partnerships with universities, business schools, engineer schools, again, that have already a solid privacy program, and that we're encouraging them to really formalize that a bit more and attract younger talents into this. One thing I will add, though, is two things I will add. One is what we're discussing about talent shortage, and we tend to focus on organizations. That's very true for regulators as well. Regulators in the public sector also needs enough talent to go and feed their ranks. They also have challenges in retaining that talent because it's a marketplace. And if you get a better offer for your skill set somewhere else, then you might go, right? It's I think there's maybe a positive glass half full perspective there, which means that it also means that people who work in supervisory authorities will then go in the private sector or in the civil society world. And so there's sort of exchanges there that can be very healthy in, again, exchanging perspective and feeding the reflection across, going back also to the semantic and common language point earlier. But that is a struggle. And the last point I will re-up, which I briefly mentioned in my introductory remarks, which is this idea, this notion that we need a common language across organizations. I mentioned this program that we launched, which is called Foundations of Privacy and Data Protection. Again, it's very much about trying to address that gap of people who kind of need to know about that stuff, but don't need to become experts. And so hopefully that also answers part of that talent shortage questions in terms of just giving that layer of professionals just the introductory knowledge so that they have the good reflexes, they know a little bit, and they can be a resource in organizations without having to make them professional and experts. I think we need to have different levels of responses there, because not every job requires the same level of expertise as well.
Absolutely. I have to say that point about it's talking about the maturation of the sector getting to a point where indeed we'll have cross-fertilization among the various jobs. I am, however, a bit concerned by the fact that you're actually recommending we need more lawyers. I find that a bit concerning.
No, I said we need many more different profiles.
Yeah.
A lot of different profiles.
Emily, what have you seen as key motivations?
Well, I totally agree with what you say. We need more different profiles, and the same applies to cybersecurity as applies to privacy, as you just mentioned. But there's also, I think, although there starts to be, I don't know if the greater good is a good term, but a greater cause, at least something that resonates for most of us today. And it's interesting in the paper that almost half of the interviewees in each country, half of them have at least once experienced a cyber attack. So it is something that if you don't understand that you're working for the greater good, at least you're working for a greater cause, something that's common to all of us. But I think something that's specific as well to cybersecurity is that we have to change the image of the sector and the jobs in this sector. Cybersecurity workers are not, geeks with hoodies and green codes behind them. As you said, we need lawyers.
They're not all men.
Not all, exactly. And we need we need experts in geopolitics. We need experts in, we need lawyers. We need all linguistics as well. We need all kind of specialties. And this is something that we really need to work on, the marque employeur, as we say in French, who recruits cybersecurity workers today and what profiles do we need. And so something that we really need to stress on, I would say.
Now, that's an interesting point. That's a very interesting point. We're going to slowly come to an end. It's very interesting to see that we thought we'd written quite a comprehensive paper, but clearly we just barely scratched the surface and we could probably carry on. In fact, we will carry on because that's the whole point of both the FIC and the FIC Agora, is really to generate more debate. You'll all see on this beautiful slide that we look forward to seeing you all in Lille from the 5th to the 7th of April. And I'm sure that a lot of these topics will come back to the program. Before we end, I would like each speaker to answer two questions. First of all, I'd really like to hear from you. What's the most innovative cyber awareness campaign you've seen? The most innovative or the funniest, or one thing that you'd really want to share with this audience? And then my second request would be, if you had one recommendation for national governments to improve citizens' online security, what would that be? Just one. I'm going to go in the order of the panel. Mel.
Thank you. In answering the first, I'm answering the previous, like adding to the previous talent attraction and retailing as well as like a good, not exactly perhaps awareness campaign, but an initiative that maybe elsewhere, but in Estonia is technology clubs for young girls. And it was started from the private industry by someone whose daughter was kicked out of a robotics club because by saying that the guys are so much more active and the girls are too slow. So he started these clubs just for girls, and I think it's empowering. And it's called Unicorn Squad in Estonia, and it's not just cybersecurity. It's more like once a week extracurricular club just for girls age 10, 15 for doing with physics, drones, robotics, and so on. I find it pretty promising. And the second question,
if you had one piece of advice.
One piece of advice
for national governments.
Again, something I wanted to say earlier but forgot, and I'd package that into that. I think there's a role for the insurance companies to play in making the private sector more cyber aware. By their rules, by their, it's very pragmatic. I mean, you either get insured or not, and if you want to get insured, you have to, like fire, you have to install the fire alarms yourself, or you pay more. The same with ransomware that hits us. So I think if governments could encourage that approach or amplify, the better. But the insurance companies really can do a lot.
Absolutely, Alejandro.
So in terms of awareness, I love humor, and my favorite campaign in Europe, and I think they got the award last year in Cybersecurity Month, is the one by it's Barri na Internetu in Slovenia. They have a series of videos that are really, really, really good. And there is an actual campaign which is not connected with security, but with safety. It was a campaign run by I think the Metro of Melbourne in Australia, which is Dumb Ways to Die. If you Google that, you'll see a very good, using humor, dark humor in this case, but it has like over 100 million views. That's impact, yeah, and that works. So getting impact through humor, through any other thing, I think it's something worth exploring, yeah, and changing the language. And this is why I really like the Slovenian one. I know them from my previous life, and I know that they work very seriously in creating humor, which is it's a very professional and difficult approach. And the role of governments from the EU level to national governments, I think they have to be the oil that keep the machine running, yeah? In terms of funding, in terms of bringing the right connection between local and national, between the different levels of education, between enforcement and response, and also between the civil society and the industry. Yeah? And so they have to be the oil, they have to keep the machine running. And it's their responsibility because they are the only actors that truly represent the societies, at least in a democratic state. So it's their responsibility. So if we want to create a digitalization and we want to foster and grow and prosperity and the digital world is the way forward, our governments, our authorities, they have to be the oil that keep the machine running. I think that's the metaphor I would use.
So it's going to be a bit of self-promotion, but if you like humor, one thing, but it's actually, there's a point to it. At the IPP, we have a lot of funny stickers that we distribute at our conferences and our events. And it's actually like, some of them are really just funky, but others are really about driving that point of like visualization of what it is we're talking about. This one that I really like, which is GDPR, DSA, CCPA, WTF. Like, which is actually leading me to the second point about government action, which is, I think, whenever we sort of government policymakers think through rules and develop rules, I think keeping in mind the fact that there's going to be people at the other end of that chain that are going to have to make that work and make that happen in practice is something that we must not lose sight of. And again, because we're a professional association, that I think that would be for me the key takeaway of making sure that it's going to be something that actually makes sense in practice.
Yes, I think on your first point on the campaigns, I think there's quite a funny one also by the French National Agency based on the series The Bureau. And this one is quite good. So there's this, and there's I saw quite a few good recruitment companies online by government mostly in the forms of sort of online escape games. Which are quite funny and funny to do for the young people. And on the second point, I really like your point on sort of making the bridge between the national and the local level, which is something that, well, especially in France, it's all very centralized. So there's a need to. There's a lot of initiatives that are made really at the local level and departments or regions. And how do you see this fitting in the say greater national strategy?
Yes, I couldn't agree more. I will share my own favorite cybersecurity campaign, which is French, quite old, but I think is a bit like a Chanel suit, just doesn't go out of style. It's, I'll say it in French, un mot de passe, c'est comme un slip, ça ne se prête pas et ça se change régulièrement. Password is like underwear. You don't share it and you should change it regularly. And I think that's absolutely fantastic. I'd like to thank our panel very, very much. Thank you, Alejandro, for being our token man today. I mean, it's not often, but we really did our best and we found a man who works in cybersecurity. Very proud. Indeed. Thank you very much to our online audience for joining and actively participating. Thank you again to Apolline Roland and Molly Hall for writing this wonderful piece. Thank you to the technical team for putting it all together. And I hope to see as many of you as possible in Lille next year. Thank you. Bye-bye.